Howdy, and welcome back to Celebrating Vintage Model Kits. Continuing with our Typhoon week, we've got the next Hawker Typhoon model, this time a Monogram kit from 1968. And this is a 148 scale Hawker Typhoon. Box shows it as Mark 1B, which is what all Hawker Typhoons that were in service basically were. Mark 1A, if you're unfamiliar, is the 12303 gun version, but virtually all Typhoons were built with Canon, hence the 1B. This is kit number PA213 150, and as I mentioned before, was released in 1968. This is a continuation of the 148 scale line of World War II aircraft that Monogram had been making since the late 50s, progressively getting better and better looking, finer detail, and less toy-like, less operating features as they were going along. And so this is towards the tail end of that period of 48 scale kits that they were producing. So to continue a little bit more on the history on the Typhoon, we can talk a little bit about some of the modifications and things that you would notice on the aircraft. There, again, was only just the one main production type, the Mark 1B. But within that, there was a lot of modifications to it, which in a lot of other aircraft would have changed the type designation, to like a Mark II, Mark IV, things like that. But for some reason on the Typhoon, they just made these changes, but never changed the production type. So the first problems that they were having was with carbon monoxide getting into the cockpit. And so they tried doing some modifications to the exhaust system. They also sealed on the early versions, they were the car door uh, uh, cockpits. And so they sealed the left side to try to keep some of the gas from going through the opening of the door. They also, cut in a few vents, but it never really seemed to solve the problem. So, throughout the entire life of the Typhoon, it was recommended that you go on oxygen from the time of engine startup until the time of engine shutdown. So, unlike other aircraft where you don't put on oxygen until you get over 10,000 feet, the Typhoon you were on oxygen the entire time you were flying. The other thing that was a modification was in the tail. The tail started falling off of the aircraft early on, typically during high speed dives. The tails were falling off at the rear transport joint. And initially, they thought it was just some metal fatigue, um, harmonic resonance, but after a short time aircraft crashed from a highly experienced test pilot, they did some further investigation, figured out that the source of it was actually the bracket holding the elevator mass balance bell crank was failing due to the buffeting that was occurring from that thick wing. And so once that failed, then the tail was allowed to flutter unrestrained, and that would then cause stress to the tail, and it would separate from the aircraft. And so initially they put an internal strap to try to reinforce it, but what ended up finally being the final modification was Mod 286, which was 20 alloy fish plates that were um, riveted around that transport joint, making it a permanently fixed joint. So that was added on the production line with the 820th Typhoon. They retrofitted them onto all existing Typhoons between December 42 and March 43. And by May 43, they had a new mass balance that was put in the production line. Altogether, they lost 25 aircraft due to these tail failures, resulting in 23 deaths. Only two guys were able to bail out after tail failure. The next modification that came on the Typhoons was in the cockpit area. The initial Typhoons had, as I mentioned before, the car door cockpit, and oops, almost lost the camera there. Had the car door cockpit, and the whole rear portion of that was solid. So they ended up um, fitting a clear perspex rear to that, and that kind of solved some of the problem. But there's a lot of clutter behind it as well too. They cut down the rear armor plate behind the pilot's head, installed some bulletproof glass pieces on the sides of that, uh, and that happened with aircraft number 102 on the production line. It was about mid 1941 when they got that. They also added a rear view mirror to help with the rearward vision. The in August of '43, they took out the large antenna mast that was obstructing view directly behind the pilot as well. Replaced that with a whip aerial. But finally, the ultimate solution to all this was the bubble canopy, which you see on this model here. This is one of the first aircraft to be able to have a blown perspex hood like that. Yeah, some could say that the FW-190 had something similar, but this was completely unobstructed view through this one-piece blown hood. And that started going on production line around November of '43, and that became the standard as Typhoons were going back for service fittings and stuff and maintenance. A lot of them were converted over from the car door type to this bubble canopy, and they would do additional modifications to the that would bring it up to what the current production standard was. Later on, they also switched over to a four-bladed prop. Um, there was an increase in the size of tires once the aircraft started getting heavier. A lot of other little things that were being added all along the production. So, a production Typhoon from 1942 looked very different from a aircraft that was coming off the line in '45, although they were still all Mark 1Bs. So that's a little bit more history on the aircraft itself. Now let's take a look at the model kit. So this is late '60s style of box from Monogram, featuring a little bit of a simplistic box art. You've got a simpler rendition of the Typhoon. There you got a tank, fully exploding here, either a panther or a tiger maybe, out here on this open field here. What I do like is what's uh, on the side over here, where it's got the Typhoon with some wind god or something blowing across here. The 48 scale is being designated by the quarter scale, which is another way of saying 48 scale. And it's got the Battle of Normandy fighter called the Tiffy by the RAF. Typhoon was very successful as a tank destroyer and ground support fighter. Reality is that he didn't really destroy a whole lot of tanks. They disabled some tanks, but they destroyed a lot of softer vehicles. But actually destroying a tank is extremely difficult by air, and not a lot of tanks were actually completely destroyed by Typhoons. So on the side here, we've got massive World War II fighter and tank destroyers. Some more information about it. Copyright of '68. Another quarter scale on the side here. Opposite side, information about the kit. Some of the features that it came with. Address for Monogram in Illinois. On the end, we've got the name again, quarter scale, and the kit number, and the 150 was for the suggested retail price of $1.50. Same thing on the other end. and nothing on the bottom. So we'll open it up and see what we got inside. So first thing we got is instructions. It's a large, looks like 9 by 10, 9 by 11 size page. Kind of a artist rendition of the completed model again here. More information about the Typhoon. Quite a lot of information there actually. Some recommendations on building models. And looks like this is a 3-step for building. Get your initial, put the fuselage together. You're starting to get some additional cockpit detail inside, which is nice. What's not shown on here is there is some sidewall stuff. You do get radiator part, decal for the instrument panel, floor, tail wheel that actually looks nice on your wing. You got the rocket mounts. Looks like some nice detail being done with the landing gear. You've actually got completed wheel well. And then finally installing the prop. Canopy parts, landing lights, wingtip lights, tail planes. Some recommendations on painting. And then you got a 4-view recommended painting guide. Colors to use. And how to apply your decals. So here we've got a set of decals here representing a specific aircraft. And there's a lot of contention over the accuracy of these decals, which I believe were based on a issue of profile on the Hawker Typhoon, which had a 6-view layout with these markings. And they're very unusual for a Typhoon of this period, in that the squadron codes being in red, the individual aircraft code being in yellow, and also the serial number of RB222. So in the research, turns out this aircraft was completely fictitious from the point of view of profile making up that 6-view, and that because of the popularity of that series, that resulted in a lot of other kits, not just this one, but other decal sets, artwork, a lot of things being done with this, with this false representation of the squadron markings. And so, RB222 was actually one of 255 aircraft that were delivered between September 44 and January 45. So when this is supposed to be an aircraft that was fighting in the Falaise Gap in France in July, that would have been impossible because the aircraft didn't even exist yet. So RB222 is a real airplane, um, but it was actually, uh, uh, let's see, with 183 Squadron, and it was coded HFK with 183 Squadron. And the TPF, there were 2 different TPFs with the squadron, and the first one was MN119. That one was shot down by flak on 19 August, and there was also MN702, and that one took over the TPF coding on the 24th of August. So there are a few photographs of 198 Squadron in Normandy on one of the fields, and the squadron codes are slightly different color than the individual aircraft color. But interviews with a lot of the pilots who were flying at that time, nobody remembers seeing an aircraft with with red codes on them, and so it's surmised that this is completely fictitious. So I'm going to show you a couple of the pictures of the aircraft there. You can be a judge. They're fairly well-known photographs from that time period. So if you want to go back and look at them, uh, you can try to decide whether or not these types of markings were accurate or not. All right, let's take a look at the plastic. So we've got our fuselage pieces here. And we've got some really fine raised panel lines. You got representation of the opening latches on the front area. The Typhoon's rear was all monocoque construction with flush riveting, so it's nice not to see a bunch of rivets on here. And the front was panels that were held on uh, by DZU fasteners. You got a representation of one of the later style exhaust manifolds on here. You do have the gun sight molds on here and the light on the rear, cut down deck. There's the fish plates, and the tail is got slight representation of fabric on there. So overall, kind of a nice, clean looking fuselage. The fit on this early kit, it's not too bad. You really wouldn't need a lot of filler on this when you're putting this together. Pretty nice. As far as the interior, mentioned before, there is some cockpit detailing on the sidewall. There's that. There's your throttle quadrant on the framing. So really stepping it up for this late 60s kit. Kind of nice to see. Then we've got our wings. Same thing again. We've got a little bit of raised panel lining. Minimal amount of riveting across the front there. You've got representations of the fasteners for opening up the gun bays. You do have a little bulge for the outside cannon. Nice representation for the ailerons, aileron actuator tabs. Space here for the navigation lights, landing lights. And we get underneath. Same thing again, very delicate work. Representation of the ejector, the shell case ejection slots, interior of your landing gear wells, got something going on there. And the cannon are represented pretty nicely. So not too bad. There's that. Now let's take a look at some of the smaller pieces. Got a couple of trees here. So there's a pilot seat. There's your rear tail wheel. There's your radiator, carburetor air intake. Got some nice representation of some screening on there. Gear doors have got some very faint detailing on that. Same thing with the wheel covers. The landing gear struts themselves are nice. I think that's the floor. And even on the inside, this is actually correct shaping for the gear doors. That's nice. Really nice. I haven't looked at this kit in a long time, so it's nice to see how really well made this is. You got your four-bladed prop, something that was introduced later in the production line. Most or all your earlier Typhoons had three-blade props, but once they started carrying a couple of 1,000-pound bombs, they went to a four-blade to try to harness as much of that horsepower as they could to get those bombs up. And then we've got this tree, which has got 8 rockets. Your tailplanes. Tailplanes are nice as well. Real fine lines. Control column. So your pitot tube underneath the wing. Rockets are kind of nice looking. They suffer from the same problem that most rockets in kits have, which is the fins are not in the right direction to be able to shoot off the rails. Typhoon could carry 8 rockets. In Normandy, they did start experimenting with carrying doubling up the rockets. So some were carrying 12, and there was a few that even carried 16 rockets. They were double stacked on the launching rails. That's that. There's your instrument panel. Nice thing, so just some piece of slab plastic. Get your wheels. And there's the hub. Hub actually has some detail in it, which is nice. Propeller hub or spinner base. And finally we've got a pilot. Monogram is usually pretty good about having nice detailed pilots. And this one looks really good. He actually looks like an actual RAF guy. Even looks like he's got a Type C helmet. So, pretty good looking pilot. And finally, we've got clear plastic. This is got a lot of scratches on top here, probably from this being in the box for almost 60 years. Probably buff out. It's fairly thin. It's not a lot of distortion in it though, but it does appear to have a pretty accurate shape. Get your windscreen. It's got a lot of distortion in the flat plates as well. You do get your navigation lights and your landing lights, which is really nice. So that's it. So overall, quite a nice little kit. Better than I remembered this thing. So this kit was issued quite a number of times by Monogram. They used this box style for a little while, and in the 70s they went to the photograph of build models. Then once you got into the late 80s, they went back to some new artwork. It was also issued a one time by Monogram Bandai, and it was also issued by Hasegawa, surprisingly. And then it was issued several times, late 90s and the early 2000s, until Revell took over. So this is a fairly prolific kit. This has been fairly popular, so they're pretty easy to find if you're looking to get yourself into a good Typhoon kit at a reasonable price. I don't think you could go wrong with this. Nice amount of detail, and I think these are cheap enough. You don't have to break the bank on getting some of the newer high-end ones and still get a good looking kit out of it. So if you've built one of these, let us know about it in the comment section. If you've got one on your shelf, shoot a few pictures of it, send it in so we can include it in our viewer build video that we're getting ready to put out. So next up in the Typhoon week, I believe, is going to be something from Revell. So keep your eyes open for that. And thanks for watching.